Today's lesson is not in the book. As I told you, I am not a slave of a book. I believe that the books are not supposed to be the teachers, because if the books were the teachers, you would not need a teacher. I look at books as tools that help teachers and help students achieve their goals. And as much as I love our book, I love this literature book, I love it so much that the principal approached me 2 years ago or 3 years ago saying that he wanted to change the book. And he showed me the book that he wanted to change, that he wanted to acquire, the new book. And that book was nowhere near as good as the one that we're currently using. So the book that we're using is quite old. It's been around for a long time. And the edition that you're supposed to be using is the 2009 edition, which is the edition that I like the most. But with all of its goodness, with all of the good qualities that that book has, it's still lacking, and in my opinion. And there's some material that if it's not in the book, and I think it's important to share with you guys, I will definitely share. And this is what I'm going to be doing exactly in the next few days that we're going to be meeting. So the title of today's lesson is genre. This is not in the book. And for me, it's very important that we deal with the subject matter, especially when you go to the internet and you find so much information, disinformation in the internet. Um, sometimes we go to the internet and, oh, we believe it. Well, why not? It's in the internet. No, that's not the case. There's a lot of stuff in the internet that is not true, that is not reliable. Even in good places like Snopes or Wikipedia, you'll find information that can be highly questionable and unreliable. And reading about genre on the internet has led me to the realization that there's a lot of confusion and misinformation about this subject matter that I am going to deal with you guys today. So be ready, take notes. Um, at the end of this presentation, there is an assessment. Again, I want to remind you that no sharing of work is allowed through Google Drive or OneDrive. That every work that you send should be uh, PDF attachment sent to email. Okay, no sharing, because it is problematic. Okay, so question before we begin, guys. Any question, any concern, any doubt that you might have about anything, even if it's not literature? Maybe you need therapy. We'll give you therapy today. No questions. Guys, I'm not getting any feedback. I'm not talking to myself alone, am I? Okay, all right, yeah, okay. I don't want to feel like I'm a crazy old man rambling, which is exactly what I was doing 2 days ago. I thought I was recording a lesson for a class that couldn't meet with me, and I spent half an hour talking to myself alone and recording nothing. So that's how pathetic things can be sometimes. So let's go to the lesson then, because we are on Zoom, and as you know, Zoom likes to kick people out of meetings. All right, so let me move this out of the way. Okay, as I said, the title of today's lesson is genre. And as I said, even though the material is not in the book, I think it's highly important. I think that understanding genre will help equip you with knowledge to better deal with the different categories of literary fictional composition, fictional, and not only deal with it, manage it more efficiently and systematically. So let's dive into the thing. Okay, we are going to define genre as uh, different categories of literary composition in relationship to their content, tone, and the technique that is being used. What that means is that there are writings that can be identified or categorized by the way that they're composed. And the way that they're composed is that they seem to have content that is similar, they have a tone that is similar, and they seem to use the same techniques or conventions. And thus, if that is the case, you can categorize them and assign a title or category to them. Um, One thing that I've noticed in the internet is that when you look for information regarding genre, it tends to confuse it with the forms of literature. And there's a difference between the forms of literature and the genres of literature. So we have to make that distinction in order to better understand them. When we talk about the forms of literature that many times are mistakenly called genres, we're talking about three main categories of compositions that you can find in any language. Any language, whether it's Japanese, Swahili, Russian, Spanish, whatever language it is, will have these three forms of literature, which are prose, poetry, and drama. Let's have an overview of each one of those. When we talk about prose, prose assumes two different forms. You know that if you go to a library, if you've ever been to a place called a library, usually when you go into a library, you'll see two signs. One says fiction, the other says nonfiction, and they are both prose. What is prose? Prose is that part of the language whose goal is the exchange of data, the exchange of information in any communication. We speak in prose, and the only intent is just the exchange of information. And that information can be fictional and it can be non-fictional. We're going to be dealing with that more specifically in future lessons. But to give you an idea, when we talk about fiction, we're talking about any composition that originates in the human imagination. So, if you read a story about a young boy in a planet far, far away, well, we know of no boy and no planet far, far away that can sustain life. So that would be a product of the imagination. That's fiction. Now, if you read like I did this morning, that today in Puerto Rico we have 953 new cases of COVID 19, which scares the wits out of me. That is super scary. Um, well, that information does not come from the imagination. I wish it came from the imagination, but it comes from statistics offered by the Department of Health. That makes it nonfiction because it is based on factual reality. So that's what prose deals with, or supposed to deal with, because sometimes you read things in the news and uh, they're not true either, right? So that's why we have to be so careful. We live in a world where there's a lot of information, and we have to be super careful with how we manage that information because it might not be factual. Okay, the information that we want is the information that is factual, unless it's fiction. If it's fiction, we just want it to be imaginative and well written. Okay, we also have poetry, which is another form of literature, another form that we see in different languages around the world. And what is the purpose of poetry? The purpose of poetry is to express the beauty of a language, even ugly languages like German. Okay, and different forms of poetry can be the allegory, the ballad, epics. You're going to be reading epics in this class. You're going to be reading all of these. You're going to be reading haiku, which is a form of Japanese poetry. You're not going to only read haiku, you're going to compose haiku. So I'm looking forward to seeing your haikus. We also read lyric poetry, odes, and sonnets. And as I said, even if you're not into poetry like me, I am able to appreciate their beauty. I hear them and I go like, wow, like that's very beautiful. Uh, so let's move on to the next one. So we got prose, we got poetry, and we got drama. And drama, I don't know if you've ever read a play or a screenplay, which is a form of drama, but drama basically assumes two forms. It can be a comedy or it can be a tragedy. And you know that when you uh, read about dramas or looking up information, you usually see the very two iconic symbols of drama, which are the two masks. And the two masks are polar opposites. One of the masks is like smiling, representing the comedy, and the other one is frowning, representing the tragedy. And you're going to be reading drama this year. You're going to be reading Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, which happens to be a tragedy. And comedies and drama are not necessarily writings that are supposed to be full of humor with the intention of making you laugh. That is not the case. Like in movies, you mentioned the word comedy, and you think, oh, that's a narrative, a storytelling form that is cinematic and has the intention of making me laugh. In a play and drama, comedy only refers to the type of story or of narrative that has a happy ending, that ends well for the protagonist. The tragedy is the opposite. The tragedy is a type of play where uh, at the end of the narrative, things end badly for most characters or for the protagonist. It ends in his or her ruin. And that ruin can take the form usually of their death. Questions, guys, about forms of literature. Oh, I'm sorry. This is something I skipped. Something I did not mention. I elaborated on the comedy and the tragedy, but I did not give a more full explanation, a fuller explanation about drama. Drama, uh, we read a play, but that's not the final intention. That's not the final goal of drama. The final goal of drama is a performance. So you read a play, but that's only half of it. The other part of it is the performance of what you read. So drama, the word drama comes from a Greek word that means action, or it means to do. So dramas are supposed to be done, they're supposed to be performed. So what is the goal of drama? You've seen that prose has a goal. Poetry has a goal. Drama has a goal. And the goal of drama is to show the forcefulness of a language. It shows us the power of words. It shows us how words can become actions. And that those are the forms of literature. Um, Now let's look at genre, because genre and form are not the same thing. Even though you might go to the internet and it might refer to it like it's the same thing, it is not. Forms of literature are the forms of literature, and genres are genres, and genres deal with fictional prose, specifically fiction, not even non-fictional prose, but fictional prose. And it is a term that we use with novels and short stories and novellas, written with the intent of fitting into a specific literary genre in order to appeal to consumers. So that's why the publishing industry uses these genres so much to help the consumer, the reader, find what they're looking for. Uh, Genres are not very rigid either. They seem to be sometimes very fluid, and sometimes their boundaries are kind of like very soft, as you'll see in the case of horror and the thriller. Many times they are confused because there's a fluidity. I mean, there's a certain rigidity, but there's a certain fluidity, and sometimes they're so fluid that they can be combined and mixed, and that is something that we're seeing a lot nowadays. When you read a book, when you watch a movie, you'll see that what you're seeing or reading is a combination of different genres, and that is done to have a broader appeal, to be more inclusive. And when authors combine these genres, it helps tell stories in a new, fresh way that can be appealing to a lot of people. I find it very appealing. I like uh, the different flavors of combining different genres in one story. Like fruit punch, I don't know how many of you like. How many of you like fruit punch? You like fruit punch, and fruit punch is not orange juice. Orange juice just has that's just one flavor, but fruit punch you got papaya, you got guava, you got pineapple juice, you got all those different tropical juices combined into a wonderful concoction called fruit punch. So some genres are like fruit punch. Some stories are like fruit punch. They combine different genres and they can be very tasty, right? And very original. So, as noted, there are different ways of labeling and defining fiction genres. But what I would like to do now is follow the main fictional genres and their subgenres, the way they are used today in contemporary publishing. When you think in genre, think like in an umbrella with little umbrellas under it. The little umbrellas would be the subgenre. Or think, for example, about a genre in the terms of the genre in terms of like if you think in a pizza, for example. Think in a pizza. What's a pizza? Well, it's bread, cheese, and sauce. You got it, and it's flat, and it's baked in an oven, and you got pizza. But you got pepperoni pizza, and that's a different thing entirely. Or you got pizza with anchovies, or you got pizza with bacon, or you get a veggie pizza, or you get a combination pizza. So all those will be like subcategories of what? Of the pizza. The pizza will be the genre, and the pepperoni pizza will be like a subgenre. So look at the different subgenres that way. Did that analogy make sense to you? Okay, it probably made you hungry too, right? Especially if you didn't have breakfast. Okay, let's move on then. Let's begin with action. Action many times is called action adventure. It's combined with adventure because it is very easy to to combine it. It's very similar to adventure, but they are different. They have their differences. Um, in this type of story, you have a protagonist that usually takes risk, and there are situations that are desperate, and you have a lot of physical violence occurring. Okay, so you have people jumping around, you have car chases, you got people running down the street being chased by a bad guy. You have someone being punched in the face from by Chuck Norris here, right? That's action, and you guys like love action, right? Because you love all that stuff. Um, okay, what happened here? Okay, I have this doing some crazy stuff. Here we go again. Okay, so uh, okay, action and adventure are usually categorized together as action adventure. So they have a lot in common, but they are different. An example of action adventure would be something like Indiana Jones films. I'm mentioning films because you don't read books too much, so maybe alluding to films and their similarities because you have genres, the same genres that like 90% of the genres that you see in literature, you also see in film. So the James Bond novels or movies, you can also classify them as action adventure. Now, action has subgenres. They include the die-hard scenario, What's a die-hard scenario? It's a type of action story that takes place in a limited location, like in a building or inside a plane or a ship or a train. The entire story takes place like there, nowhere else. And sometimes this place is like in some kind of danger or threat by some bad guys, and you have a single hero trying to defeat them using cunning and intelligence, right? And many novels have copied this formula. It's relatively new. It's been around like since the 80s. You also have military or war stories. You have spy fiction, which is another subcategory. There are others like samurai fiction, Western stories, where you have cowboys and Indians. That's action. And you got something called girls with guns or girls with swords, and that's a relatively new subgenre that is very popular. Uh, Adventure is the next genre, and it's a story about a protagonist that journeys. So adventure and action are not necessarily the same thing because adventure usually involves travel. Like when you go on a vacation, that's like an adventure, right? You're getting on an airplane, you're going to a place you've never been to before. And this is it's a very open genre. It's very open. It can be combined like with anything. It's like salt. You can put salt on anything except coffee. Um, Comedy is another genre, and in fiction and in fictional prose as opposed to drama, here comedy is a type of story that is designed to be humorous. It's designed to make you laugh, and it also has a series of subgenres like slapstick, which is the type of comedy that is very juvenile, it's very infantile. It involves a lot of physics. It's also called physical comedy. Usually, when you watch Looney Tunes and you see someone running around like the Pink Panther, or you have like I don't know, Tom chasing Jerry, and he steps on a rake and smashes his face with the rake. Well, that's what slapstick is usually about. Comedies of manners are a little bit more sophisticated, and they basically parody rich people and the life of rich people and the life of the rich and the famous and of beautiful people, like Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing and uh, a sitcom that came out a few years ago called Ugly Betty and a telenovela called Betty La Fea. That would be comedy of manners. You also have the combination of romance and comedy. They make up romantic comedy. That's self-explanatory. Black comedy is usually a type of comedy that is done with subjects that are very taboo in our society. And people with a very particular sense of humor appreciate it. Most people do not, because they find it sick or offensive. And you got the parody that's just mocking or satirizing other genres, people, or work or events. Crime would be our next genre. And crime is about criminal enterprises and the lives of not law abiding but non law abiding citizens. Examples of or subgenres of this genre include hard boiled, which is very violent and sexual in its content, like Frank Miller's Sin City. Hard boiled. You get a hard boiled egg by applying what? A lot of heat. So in this kind of story, you have a lot of heat going on. You also have the detective story, which is about an investigation, like Law and Order, or the Sherlock Holmes series of novels. And you also have gangster, like Mario Puzo's The Godfather, which refer to stories about the mafia or the Cosa Nostra, organized crime. You have the courtroom drama, also known as the legal thriller. You're seeing that it's drama and thriller. It's a combination here. This one is very fluid. And this is the kind of story that takes place in a courtroom. Courtrooms are scary places. Believe me, I've been there. Thank God I won, but there can be very scary places. And the whodunit. Have you ever played Clue? Who killed Mr. Body? Like who done it? Like Nancy Drew here, she's trying to find out who did it. Oh, it's very similar to the detective story. That's another genre, subgenre. You also have fantasy. And the thing about fantasy is that fantasy is one of three genres that deal with the extraordinary, of extraordinary situations. And in these three genres, extraordinary situations are explained or justified differently. In the case of magic, in the case of fantasy, it's justified with magic. Why is that guy flying on the carpet? Because it's a magic carpet. That's why. So that's the explanation. It's magic. That's the justification. So these stories involve magic. There are many subgenres like epic or high fantasy, which are stories that take place in another world, another reality. And you have low fantasy, which happen here on Earth, like Harry Potter, right? Harry Potter happens where? In London, in England. High fantasy stories like The Lord of the Rings, they take place where? In Middle Earth. Or The Song of Fire and Ice, also known as Game of Thrones, they take place where? In Westeros. Where's Westeros? Not here. Where is Middle Earth? Not here. Wherever it is. So that's high fantasy. Other fantasy subgenres include fairy tales, dying Earth, science fantasy like Star Wars that combines fantasy and science fiction, and very popular today, superhero fiction like Miss Wonder Woman right here, where people have special abilities. One of my favorite subgenres are sword and sorcery, the stories of Conan the Barbarian, written by Robert E. Howard. Um, I read all his books when I was in college. I was introduced to him by a guy that was in my boarding house, and I read the whole thing. But there are many novels that come out and many short stories regarding this character. It's a blend of fantasy, heroic fantasy, and horror. So you usually have like a brawny hero, and the villain is a wizard or an evil sorcerer or something like that, right? Or an enchantress. And wuxia is an Asian kind of fantasy. It mixes martial arts and fantasy. And guys, we end here. We have an assessment. We're going to continue talking about genre next week because we're not done with genre. This is what we covered today. Um, so please do the assessment. Don't share. Send it to me as an attachment. And if you have no more questions, this is all I have for you today, guys.